Hello, hello. Welcome to the Shaping Spirit podcast. My name is Cyril Warrer.
My name is Bryan Roig, and we are just a couple of California guys who collected a bunch of academic degrees studying spirituality all over the world, bringing it right back here to you. And Cyril, what is the topic of the day?
The topic of the day is building our spiritual muscles.
I love that. Tell me more.
Well, how much do we actually have to put effort into a spiritual, practice, right? Over and above just having a certain, let's say, belief or worldview about the universe or about consciousness or about this or that. That's kind of like the main question. Do you follow?
Yeah, a little bit. I'd love to just talk to me about that. Like, give me some guidance here.
I like to bring it back to, to the simple discussion on, that we often hear in Christian circles, faith versus works, And for those who don't know, it's really simple, There's this tension. Some Christian authorities or leaders would say, no, it's all about faith. You just have to have faith, for example, in Jesus. But this, the principle here, we're talking about universal principles of spirituality. So, you can parenthesis out the fact that it's a Christian context. It applies to all contexts. But so this tension between, on the one side, just having some sort of faith or belief in a savior or in a particular whatever worldview or scripture and then on the other side of the whatever, I always miss that word. What am I looking for? That word when you have two ends of the spectrum. Thank you. So on the other side of the spectrum, you've got the idea that it's only by doing a particular type of meditation or a particular type of prayer or doing a particular type of pious activity or doing good or actions, and that's how you get your salvation or your spiritual realization or your whatever liberation and so on and so on. So where does someone from LA or New York or Kansas City in 2023 who's starting out his or her sort of quest for a deeper spiritual dimension in his or her life, where does he or she situate himself or herself along that that spectrum? What do you reckon?
Well, I think it's you have to start small. So I will start to equate it with fitness training because it's something that I have a lot of experience with. Back in the day, I was a certified personal trainer and all this. I teach martial arts, so I think it's a lot of it is about baby steps. And you have to split it into different categories. When you look at physical fitness training, you have your cardiovascular training, you have your stretches, flexibility training, you have your weight training, strength training. So you have to kind of bucket things, I think, and kind of get some perspective and go, okay, well, where do I start? How am I going to build these spiritual muscles?
And why?
Yeah.
Why would you want to build your spiritual muscles or stretch them?
Well, it's like anything else, right? If you want to grow, you have to have a strong foundation. And the only way you can have a strong foundation is building those muscles. You don't want to be like a lifeless blob. You see these people that they sit on the couch all day eating Doritos and bonbons or whatever, watching television, and they're just, lifeless blobs. There's no life. So in order to kind of gain real life comes from spiritual depth and spiritual cultivation. So you got to start somewhere. And, if you can go to the gym and have a personal trainer, you should be able to have some kind of personal trainer when it comes to spiritual exercise and spiritual development. And I think finding the right personal trainer is a big challenge. So a lot of times you just have to kind of get in a good group, find a couple people that are interested in developing their spiritual muscles as well, and start small. Like, I don't know. I recently, get this, I recently joined a group that focuses on breath work. So we have like this little Zoom meeting twice a week in the morning, and we've been working on like breath and the power of breath. And I thought that was fascinating. And I'll tell you, in just doing 2 sessions, I feel a difference in terms of being more connected, being more centered, and it's actually helped my spiritual practice tremendously. So starting with something like that, maybe just starting with breath work and starting with how to be present, I think are key components in terms of building spiritual muscles.
You brought in a second point, which is interesting, and that's the idea of building one's spiritual muscles in the context of a congregation, in the context of a group, right? A fellowship. There's these different synonyms for the same concept. So I think there's something to be said about that. No man is an island. I don't know who said that. Who said that? Do you know? No man is an island. Some famous writer.
Yeah,
said no man is an island.
Yeah.
And so I think in a similar way, we can make the argument that no spiritualist or no spiritually, no spiritual person, in the modern digital, whatever, society we live in is an island. In other words, it becomes hard. Like in my personal, experience, for example, I like my, isolation and being alone. Like right now, for example, I'm talking, as you know, but our hearers may not. I'm in the middle of this jungle in Tulum, Mexico, and in this like beautiful little sort of cottage, and really clean, and in the middle of the jungle. And well, fortunately, I have internet, so we can do this thing. And I like it because there's no one around. There's no neighbors. It's just trees and birds and crickets outside. But I know that, I can't just do this solo program forever. Just not only on a sort of social human level, but on a spiritual level too. My spiritual practice, and I would say yours perhaps also has sort of a dual dimension. Like, there's a sort of a one-on-one with the divine, which you do sort of do alone, and then there's a one with many others and the divine altogether, whether it's doing breath work or whether it's doing Zen meditation or whatever, mantra chanting or whatever it is. Something is to be said about the strength that comes from having fellowship. Would you agree?
To an extent, yes, and I'll kind of share with you where maybe I would kind of push back on that a little bit. In my business life side of things, we've repeatedly had to over the years take these tests where they try and fit you into different categories. What type of person are you? And, are you like the social animal? Are you this type of person that needs a lot of interaction? I every time I do this test, I get the exact same results. I'm what's called the lone wolf. So I'm very independent. I'm very independent minded. I like doing things how I like doing them. I like doing them on my own. That being said, I don't mind and I enjoy a certain degree of social interaction when it comes to my spiritual growth and spiritual development. But for me, it has to be very small circles. I am not a fan of big congregations. You cannot get, it makes my skin crawl going into big festival situations or going into a big religious institutional like church or temple or something.
You wouldn't
I
like
don't
to
like
go
that.
to a Hillsong Sunday morning service in New York City with this dope modern worship music?
Nah, it's just not for me. But I appreciate what people do. I'm not a fan of like all of a sudden there's like 1,000 people around me sitting and bowing down or just doing whatever. That's just not my vibe. I understand how it fills a lot of people up. They feel the need to have a bunch of people around them, but I don't need, here's the thing. Here's what it comes down to. I personally do not need validation from others in order to have my personal spiritual development and build my spiritual muscles. And I think a lot of times when people are in a group, they do that. Number one, because they have very little faith or weak faith, right? Like you're talking about faith versus works. And then the other part of that, I feel like they don't put in the action, the individual action. They don't put the self-work in to develop their own spiritual self-worth. And I think that that's critical. Because when I'm going to the gym, like, dude, I train 6 days a week, 7 days a week, okay? I'm in the gym lifting weights in the morning. I'm teaching, martial arts at night. So I'm always engaged in all this activity. When I go to the gym, I go by myself. Once in a while, a friend of mine, he comes with me, or I meet him there. But boy, sometimes he's a pain in the butt because he talks too much, and I just want to train. So for me,
Right.
A lot of times I'm very much like, I just want to be in the zone. I want to just crank my metal really loud when I'm training, and I just want to do my thing. Other people are like, no, I need that group environment.
But when you say you want to do your thing, that comes back to this point of, stretch. You are literally like physically stretching or building your muscles, right? And so can we come back to that question about, because, just like, okay, you had a shot at what'd you call them? Who sit on their sofa watching TV and eating
it's just like
Doritos?
a lifeless blob.
Okay, you call them blobs. So let me have a go here. With all the respect to, Dorito eating blobs and what I call sort of like sentimental kind of like show off, but not very, show off kind of shallow spirituality. You often hear, I'm really spiritual, like, right, I go to Bhakti Fest, like, and it's cool. I mean, it's good. Any sort of attitude towards the divine or towards spirituality in general is, I would say, 5 billion times, to the 10th million power better than, being, an avowed physicalist who doesn't believe that consciousness is something beyond, the interaction of protons and neurons in the brain. But still, there's this, you often see it, this sort of like cheap, spirituality where like, I'm really spiritual, I'm really spiritual, I'm really spiritual. But then like, what do you do? Like out of your 24 hours, how many of those minutes or those hours are dedicated to exclusively, coming to the theme of today's podcast, building your spiritual muscles, like doing something, right?
I think, what it comes down to is you have to get, number one, I think you have to get organized. And I highly suggest anybody who is listening, right, for all of our listeners, try this. Number one, get yourself some type of goal planner or an activity planner, like a planner book. You can get it at a bookstore, get it on Amazon or whatever. Start writing your goals and your intentions. You have to set your intentions for the day first thing in the morning.
Do you do that? Out of curiosity.
I have it for
Every
for the
day?
week. I have it for the month. I have it for the day. I set my
Really?
intention every morning.
You write it down?
A lot of times I have stuff the night before that I have ready to go. Sometimes I have it on a physical piece of paper. Sometimes I just have it in my calendar. It pops up right on my phone. So I know, okay, boom, here's what I'm doing. Boom, 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 boom. So I already know. My first thing is I have my, like we've talked about before, I have my 5 minutes in the morning. So my 5 minutes of my personal spiritual meditation in the morning, that's what gets me going to meet the day. I think another thing you have to do is start picking spiritual literature that resonates with you, not what resonates with your friend or your cousin or your spouse, what resonates with you. And
That's very
that
important.
is incredibly important because we don't want to have what I would call spiritual peer pressure. And what spiritual peer pressure is somebody saying to you, oh, well, you just got to check out this, or like people like this book called The Four Agreements, or is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Look, I couldn't get through 5 minutes of that guy's audiobook. It had like these little bells ringing. I didn't like his voice. I don't care what the message was supposed to be. It turned me off. And you have tons of people going, oh, this is the greatest treasure ever. Not for me. So you have to have enough, to use a
Self-confidence?
Yeah, self-confidence. I'll use an old Yiddish term. You have to have enough of your own personal chutzpah, which means your own personal self-identification to be like, no, that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to read this book, right? So if it's something like, you want to read the Quran, read the Quran. Or if there's some Sufi mystic that had a special book, there's actually a Sufi mystic that had a book that came out. I got to look at it. I saved it on Amazon that I plan on buying for myself. It looked really cool. If you want to read the Bhagavad Gita, read the Bhagavad Gita, whatever that spiritual book is. If you want to read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, you do that. I don't care if all of your friends say you're crazy for reading that. Why would you want to read that? That's so boring. You should read, the Stephen Hawking's Origin of the Universe. Bullshit. You pick the book that works for you. Do not succumb to spiritual peer pressure. And ultimately, if you can find some kind of guide, right, or some kind of spiritual personal trainer that can get you where you need to go, and you can kind of consider us, right? We're not saying, here, give us $500 a month and we'll train you up spiritually, but kind of look at this Shaping Spirit podcast, what we're doing here as kind of like your basic spiritual personal trainers, right? We're trying to get you motivated to find your path, develop your path, and root yourself. That's key. How are you going to root yourself? This is by starting with the basics to build your spiritual muscles. You have to have good roots in order to build that foundation to grow spiritually, right? And protect it. Thoughts?
You touched on a really important point, this thing about, you touched on 2 points. The main point you made about, being yourself and gravitating to what really touches you in the heart, regardless of peer pressure, is fantastic. But the other point that you mentioned just before that is so fundamental. It's so fundamental. And that is, you got to feed your soul with, with wisdom, with divine wisdom. Because we're constantly, we're constantly interacting. Our senses, our mind, and therefore our consciousness is always interacting with matter, right? Through whether it's the eyes or the ears or the nose or touch or especially ears and eyes. And so we're consuming, daily we're consuming info, data, right? And in order for us as souls or as spiritual conscious, units of spiritual consciousness to be healthy, to use that analogy that you use of building one's spiritual muscles, you got to make sure to feed that consciousness spiritual, stuff, spiritual info, spiritual data. You know that analogy of the bird. I mean, it's a simple analogy, but I think it's really deep. The analogy of the bird and the cage.
Which one?
The one where there's some guy or some woman who buys a bird, and the bird's in the cage, and then the person spends all day cleaning the cage and making it shine, and really making it beautiful, only focusing on the cage, right? And forgetting to feed the bird inside, right? And then the bird one day just drops dead because you didn't you just focused on the freaking cage and not the actual person, be he or she a bird who was inside the cage.
That's cool. You know what? I've never heard that. I love that.
Right?
That's cool.
Yeah.
We got to, you know what? We got to sit with that for a second, because that's pretty intense, man. And you're right. We collectively as a society, we are so bewildered by everything that's going on around us. This material consumption, the news, and all this chaos and the polarization. If you're living in the United States, from one political party to the other, and this news channel to this news channel, and all this nonsense, when ultimately none of it matters and none of it's going to help you develop spiritually. None of it. Getting sucked into the chaos of conflict, is going to drag you down into such a low level where you're going to become agitated by everyone and everything, to the point where you're so sensitive that no, this is wrong. No, you're not doing the same thing I'm doing. No, we have to be rooted, right? And I think that analogy that you just brought is it's brilliant. I've never heard that before, and that just knocked my socks off, man. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I quoted it because you brought up this point of having of stretching or building your spiritual muscles precisely by reading. Like you literally talked about books. Reading spiritual topics, spiritual books, or hearing, and yeah, we can make a little ad for this Shaping Spirit podcast. You will get spiritually strong by listening to the Shaping Spirit podcast.
We're your spiritual personal trainers, guys. And
we are your spiritual.
And guess what? What we've talked about before, and I do want to reiterate this point, is spirituality is free. So if somebody's saying, hey, if you give me $1,000 a month, I'm going to teach you how to be spiritual, please kick him in the face and run away. Run as fast as you can. Because that's bogus, man. That is absolutely bogus. You want to buy a book? Go buy a book. Okay? If you want to buy a DVD or get a lecture or subscribe to some person's lecture, or you want to donate to somebody who you think has really helped others, and you want to help other people, great. But if somebody's telling you and hoodwinking you, hey, for X amount of dollars, I'm going to make you spiritual, please. That is one of the biggest cons you could ever run into. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of examples, even in the the 21st or late 20th and 21st centuries, of so-called spiritual leaders from whether it's a Judeo-Christian background or whether it's an Asian background, who totally took advantage of innocent people by stealing money from them in the name of spiritual knowledge, whether it's selling some secret mantra that's really really expensive and that you're not supposed to share with anyone, and when you finally do, you realize, oh my God, I have I got the same one also. Or whether it's some leaders of a mega church who justifies taking tons of money from his flock to buy some, not just one, but many like private jet planes. I mean, the list is long, right?
Yeah. Have you ever seen the show Curb Your Enthusiasm with Larry David?
No.
Okay. Do you know who Larry David is?
Well, thanks for putting me on the spot, but
okay,
no, I don't.
Well, a lot of people don't. So you've heard of the show
good.
Seinfeld, right? It was a very popular show in the 90s. Okay, so Larry David was the creator of Seinfeld, the show with Jerry Seinfeld. So years later, he created a show called Curb Your Enthusiasm. And here's the reason for the setup with this. There's one episode where he and his friend are arguing over like a special spiritual mantra that one of them bought. And he's like, hey, I need it because I gotta cure something in my life. I need to borrow your mantra. He's like, no, I paid this money. You can't have it. And so he's practicing the mantra and he's like doing all this stuff, thinking it's good. Then he finds out from his friend that the mantra that this guy paid for means fuck you. And he says, I've been saying, it says fuck me. It says like, it's saying fuck me. He's like, fuck me, no, fuck you, after he finds out what it is. So, yeah, please, you're buying some mantra, you don't know what the hell it really is. Unless you're going to somebody who's an expert in that language and an expert in that art and study, in that particular spiritual path, guess what? They're going to give it to people. They're not going to charge you money for it. And again, that's a fraud.
Well, let me ask you, let me kind of play the devil's advocate, but it's not totally the devil's advocate, because I would say there's some validity in what I'm going to propose right now. What about the argument that it's not unhealthy, it's not weird, it's not, dangerous to sacrifice a little bit of your money for a spiritual cause? I mean, and what comes to mind, for example, is the age-old tradition of tithing that you find in the Christian world.
Yeah.
Right? Every member of a congregation, gives X dollars to the church, right?
Yeah.
To the so, what's to be said about
every religious
that?
tradition does it. Well, that's a whole different matter, right? That's something where, like, okay, what we've talked about before, religion versus spirituality, that's your flavor. And if it's something where like, okay, you feel like contributing to this particular religious organization and it's fulfilling you spiritually, that's a different story altogether, because you're contributing to the success of the mission, right? The success of the distribution. It's not like, hey, I got a special secret mantra for you. You know, give me $5,000 and then I'll let you have it, but don't tell anybody what it was. That I think is different. So what you're saying, you know, donations to a church and, you know, wherever you go, helping out, giving, stuff like that, that's a different thing altogether. You know, so I don't really think that's a devil's advocate thing. I think it's more just a clarification in my point. I'm just saying there's a lot of con artists out there that consider themselves spiritual beings and say, I'm going to save you. Come up on stage, give me $1,000. I'm going to whack you with my coat over your head, and magically the devil's going to come out of you. You know, or
You know, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
no, or you have like I said, you know, guys that say like they take like these stories and they go, I came out of the desert and I had these special realizations and I'm healing people with cancer now. And guess what? I can make you a millionaire. All you have to do is study with me, give me all your money, and I'm going to make you rich beyond your wildest dreams. This is what I'm talking about. Maybe one way we'll do a podcast on spiritual con artists. That might be kind of fun.
That would be cool. My dad, you know, grew up he grew up in a French colony in Egypt, right? Because his parents worked there, and he grew up with the Jesuits, and his whole life he was sort of an agnostic, you know, leaning more towards the physicalist paradigm, and you know, being French, he was always sort of fascinated by pop American culture. And he was always, like, as I grew up, I always remember he would be fascinated by watching like televangelists, you know, telling, you know, for example, you know, like, put your hand on the TV screen right now, right now, and then, you know, and dial 800, you know, whatever, give to the church, and you'll see, you know. But let me ask you this, coming back not coming back, but continuing with this theme of building muscles, and you're more experienced than I am, way more. Like, you actually worked out and everything. I don't, unfortunately. I like to walk a lot, but I don't do more than I think I should. Anyway, I mean, I don't do enough. But you know, when you correct me if I'm wrong, when you build muscle, you put like a certain amount of weight, for example, on the weights, right? And it's just below your threshold. It's like there's a sort of a sweet spot where you're hurting, right? But you're not damaging yourself. But there's got to be, like, you're at no pain, no gain. There's got to be some sort of effort, right? Where things are actually happening. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. So there's a variety of different ways to grow muscles physically, right? Or to become physically strong. Some people use calisthenics and just do body weight exercises. You can have progressive resistance loads. So meaning you can do heavier weights, lower repetitions.
Exactly.
Higher repetitions, lower weights. I kind of do a mix of everything. But yeah, you have to push yourself a little bit.
So that's exactly what I'm getting at. The idea of pushing yourself. I mean, I really would like that sentence, you know, push yourself, you know, in a healthy, holistic way, to be the theme of today's podcast, at least for me, you know, that in a healthy, you know, healthy context, you should push yourself. So if that means, you know, watching less, you know, irrelevant social media and spending a little bit more time reading scripture, whatever it may be, whether it means, you know, maybe going to bed a half hour earlier so you can wake up a half hour earlier and spend that half hour meditating or praying, right? Or whether it means, you know, cutting down on the amount of cigarettes you smoke because, you know, it's not good for your health, you know, and even spiritual health, we could argue. That type of healthy pushing yourself, which is what we do in the gym, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, it is. And you know, to that point, I dovetail a little bit because I've seen people fall where they give up on their spiritual path or their spiritual development because they push themselves too hard.
Right.
So the key, I think, when we are building our spiritual muscles is to push ourselves where it motivates us to continue. Right?
Long term.
We got to play the long game here.
We're the long,
We're
yeah,
playing the
totally.
long
This is the long. This is the lifetime
This is a
game
lifetime,
here, not just 6 months.
This is a lifetime game. So, when we're playing the long game of spiritual development and spiritual growth, building these spiritual muscles, you cannot. It's just like somebody going to the gym, lifting weights, going home, looking in the mirror, going, "Well, my muscles didn't grow." No, but look at yourself in a year, right? So this is why we always have to check in with ourselves, have our contemplation and our spiritual reflection so that we see our growth over time. It's not that all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I'm so wise now. Look how much I've grown spiritually. I'm
don't
so
you see me
profound. Yeah, it's
shining?
not that. I think one of the key things in terms of your spiritual growth and building your base is humility.
Interesting.
Right? So the more you grow spiritually, I believe the more humble you become and you start to realize, wow, I don't know anything. Wow, I need more
that's
guidance.
the one quality you can't brag about.
Exactly. You can't brag about.
I just want to let you know
if you
I'm
do, you
a
look like an
really
ass.
humble person.
You look like a complete asshole if you do. You walk into a room and go, "Oh, I'm so humble." I remember it just funny joke really quick. Well, it's a funny story. So this woman years ago, she didn't like the fact that I was a vegetarian. And I was at this, I'll save the details, but I was at this dinner party. And I shouldn't have even been at this dinner party, but unfortunately I was obligated to be at this particular dinner party with these people. And she's talking about how this Buddhist monk was so humble because she was just constantly nagging and nudging at me that I'm a vegetarian and how I was so arrogant for not eating barbecue. Because I don't want to put animal flesh in my body. I'm arrogant. So she said, and this Buddhist monk, he was so humble that he would eat whatever anybody gave him, even though he was a vegetarian. So when people gave him a steak, he ate it because he was so humble. I go, that's not humility. That's stupid. I go, that's just being a dumbass. And she's like, well, how could you say something like that? Okay. I go, let me just shift it on you. If I handed you a bowl of shit, would you eat it because you're humble? And she's like, no, how could you say something like that? Well, to me, you put a bowl of steak in front of my face is just the same as eating a bowl of shit. So, no, I'm going to defend myself. And it has nothing to do, at that point, it has nothing to do with humility. It has to do with you insulting my values. I'm not pushing my values on you. Don't say to me that a Buddhist monk was so humble because he decided to eat a bowl of shit. Because if I handed you a bowl of shit right now, you would be offended. So, we have to understand, like I was saying at the beginning of the podcast, when we are developing our spiritual muscles, we cannot succumb to peer pressure. Okay? This is very important. This is why a lot of times...
There's a lot of it, huh?
There's a lot of it. There's a lot of peer pressure in everything we do. From the time we're children, all the way through adulthood, you work a corporate job, you have a bunch of corporate assholes around you. Be like us. Be like us. Well, that's not our corporate culture. You can't say that. You can't be that. Fuck you. Pardon my language, but I'll be who I am whenever I want. So this sense of, oh, well, you have to be like us, otherwise you are inferior to us. No, sorry, I reject that categorically. And in developing our spiritual muscles, you have to have that durability. You have to have that belief in yourself, that faith in your mission, your personal mission, your personal growth, to build that spiritual strength, to kind of look at everybody and say, whoever's with me, you can join me. If you don't want to join me, you're not with me, get the hell out of my way. Right?
And for that, you got to be convinced that, the spiritual side of your life, the spiritual dimension of your life that parallels your career and your relationships and your money and your tax paying and your artistic life and so on, which all, are spiritual also when they're, connected to a higher reality. That dimension is everything for you. It's like it's everything. It's the most important thing in your life.
Yeah.
It's the greatest treasure in your life. It's the greatest, like if you're a gardener and you've got this amazing rose bush, and that's like the prized plant in your garden, then you treasure that rose bush, and you water it, you protect it, you give time to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you got to be convinced that the spiritual side of your life, which is at the foundation of everything else in your life, is really the most important thing in your life.
Yeah. It really is. And you have to protect that, because what I have noticed, and I'd love to hear your thought on this, when you start to progress spiritually, even if you don't talk to anybody about it, there's people that will see it. Some will be happy for you. Other people will be envious, and they will do everything they can to chop you down. And you want to stay away from those types of vampires, those types of psychic vampires. Especially
when you're coming from either sort of the category, the nuns. Mm-hmm. There's this book called, I forgot, there was this two sociologists of religion. They wrote this pretty seminal book about 10 years ago where they basically analyzed, religion in America from a sociological point of view. And, you've got the Christians, the Buddhists, the Hindus, the Muslims, the Jews, and then you've got this huge growing category of people called the nuns, like None. Like I'm neither this or neither that. I don't belong to any particular congregation. The nuns, and not N-U-N like a Catholic nun, a woman in a convent, like a nun, like no specific affiliation, right? And that category is becoming huge in America and growing and growing. So when you're coming from that sort of nun background, and you get inspired to become spiritual, or to become more spiritual, or if you come from a background of a very specific tradition, but then you want to, I don't want to say jump ship, but you want to explore another tradition. Mm-hmm. In both those cases, chances are that you're surrounded, by people who really won't relate to your newfound, inspiration.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's that was our old school mentor who did that book, Wade Clark Roof.
Yeah, we both shared this really
Clark.
Cool
Rest in
professor
peace.
at University of California.
Yeah. It's funny story, guys. We were actually we were thinking we should invite him on the podcast. Then I looked it up, and
Professor Wade Clark Roof.
Sadly, he passed away a few years ago. And it broke my heart reading that, because I was like, man, Clark, he was so funny. And he would have been so good. He would have been I believe he'd be so proud of us that we're doing this.
That's true.
He was what a gentleman, what an amazing man. I learned so much from him, and he gave me so much rope. He gave me so much freedom in my studies. One of my finals, no joke, everybody's writing all these papers. He let me write a song, and I literally performed the song in front of the whole class at a park. He's like, "All right,
no way.
All right, Bryan, yeah, you got an A. Don't worry, you know what you're doing." And that's just the way he was, because he never just let me do it. I have to do it like the way everybody else was doing it. He just let me kind of roll with it. So I got an A in that particular class just by writing a song about this particular spiritual topic, and that was pretty awesome.
What you were saying really rang home for me, and I realized just now I've been taking it for granted, because I've been sort of a really spiritual person, for about 30 years. Let's say trying to be a spiritual person for 30 years or so, and I've made it a point. I have friends in different spheres of society, but I do like to hang out with other people who are also taking their spiritual life seriously, right? And I have done so as a matter of principle for the last several decades. But you brought me back when you were just talking 5 minutes ago. You brought me back to 1993 in Paris. I was doing a year abroad through the college I was going to on the East Coast, and I wanted to do a year abroad in Paris at the Sorbonne University. And that's when I started taking my spiritual life seriously. And I'll spare you the details, but I remember that, I started talking to my old friends, from high school, for example. And I was like, dude, like, check this out. Like, and yeah, and this is what counts. And, and he was like, what are you talking about, man? Like, what? I'm in New Haven right now. The parties are great, dude. I have all these girlfriends, and then the pod's great. And I was like, but wait, yeah, but fine. But there's something more. There's something more important. Check this out. And he was like, what are you talking about, man? Like, he couldn't relate.
Yeah.
And I remember my sister, she was like, like, dude, what kind of weirdo have you become? And my stepmom also, I remember, like, everyone around me was like, what happened to Cyril? And I was like totally blissed out. Like, oh my God, like, yes, I have direction now. Like, yes, the higher values of life are just clear to me, And I wouldn't say demonized, but almost, like ostracized by a lot, like I would say the large majority of my friends and family.
Yeah, a lot of my friends, when I started really getting into my spiritual life, it was something very similar. Like it first started with a couple of books. A friend of mine had come back from summer and had a book. He says, like, I started reading a couple of pages. I can't make any headway on this. And I was kind of like the group pundit, so to speak, right? I read everything. I was a voracious reader, so they always appreciated, hey, dude, can you read this and tell us what it means? Of whatever it was.
So what's that commercial for remember?
Yeah.
Sorry, but you remind me of that commercial from the 1980s about some cereal. Mikey likes it.
Yeah. Life cereal. So I read the book, and I was laughing and crying through this book. He's like, well, what's wrong? I go, dude, this book right here, this little thing that I was reading, I go, this contains the answers to everything you would ever want to know. He's like, well, read it and just kind of tell me, at the end. So I kind of gave him a synopsis afterwards. And it changed my life completely. There's a lot of, rock and roll chaos in my life, and we'll just leave it at that, that I snapped out of my, behavior pretty quickly. And it was like immediate. And then one of my other friends, who's actually a world famous scientist and lecturer right now, and maybe one of these days we'll figure out how to get him on the podcast or something. But if you look around, you'll find out who I'm talking about without naming names. He comes up to me one day. He says, "So," because he knew me, and we're all good friends. He's like, "So are you doing all this because you like getting the free food, or are you doing this because you actually like the philosophy?" And I looked him dead in the eye, and I go, "Both." Poor college student. I didn't have any money. If I had $5 to like make it through the week to eat, I was eating beans and rice and just scraps of whatever I could get. But, I was going somewhere where I could get free meals. Like, oh my God, I could get a meal. All I need to do is vacuum the rug and hang out and listen to a lecture, and you'll feed me food and I get to read books. Sign me up. And he looked at me like I was, all of a sudden, his buddy became an alien. What do you mean you want free food and books? I'm like, dude, you're studying all this science stuff. And I'm like, so I'm doing it. I'm studying spiritual science. He's like, that's over my head, man. I just can't. He's like, I can't wrap my head around it. And the funny thing is now, like I said, he's got a world famous podcast. He's lecturing all over the country, just about pure chemicals and science and medical stuff. And he's very brilliant in his lane, right? But it's funny, like how he went one way, I went the other. And it's just like, one of these days I'll try and wrangle him in and get him on, and people freak out when the stories come out. But it's cool.
He should come. It's nice. Yeah. So I think we've kind of gone around the bandwagon here. I think we should conclude with the main theme. Like we as a society, we as a group, we as this little tribe that is here around this Shaping Spirit podcast, we have to take our spiritual life seriously. We have to build our muscles on a daily basis, whatever that means for us individually. We have to remember that, the spiritual dimension, our spiritual consciousness really is the backbone of our happiness, of our satisfaction in life, of our peace of mind.
Yes.
And And we gotta, in a holistic, intelligent, healthy way, we gotta, pump those weights,
Agreed.
right?
Yeah.
What would you add?
I would say be realistic with your goals and your expectations. And remember, a good measurement, a good measuring stick is your humility. The more you acknowledge you don't know, the more you're growing. And the more satisfaction you get in giving, the more you're growing spiritually. So those are the two things I would say right there. That measurement of humility, wow, I don't know that much. I need to learn more, right? And getting satisfaction in giving to others, helping others, really and extending compassion and empathy to all those in need. That's that. But measure yourself. Just take your time with it. We're playing the long game here. I've seen too many people where they're like very rigid in their spiritual practice and they're new, right? They're like 3 months in, 6 months in, they're standing up straight. They got very unique headstands, or they're practicing certain prayers and stuff like this. And they're like going, well, I'm better at this because look, I can do this for 3 hours straight. I'm like, good luck with that, buddy. Let's see how long you last. And inevitably, 6 months later, a year later, whatever, they're gone. They're just gone. They're just out. Yeah, I wasn't interested anymore. I fell off because they went too intense all at once. You have this burst of enthusiasm and that intensity wanes, right? Measure your expectations. I don't have good days in the gym every day. There's days that I suck. There's days I suck on the mat when I'm teaching and my body's all creaking and aching. But I'm measuring growth over time. So if we really kind of measure our growth over time, be patient with your growth. Start small. Don't pick up a 100-pound weight in the gym and go, here, I'm just going to curl this. No, you pick up a 2-pound weight. Let me see how I can do it with proper form and function. So practice building your spiritual muscles with the same intentions. Form and function. Be careful with what you're doing. Find good guidance. Hang out with us here at Shaping Spirit Podcast, right? And, just have good people around you that will uplift you and be proud of you and happy for your path and not try and detract you, because those are the type of nutcases you don't want in your life. Avoid the toxicity, avoid the psychic vampires, and let's have fun growing together.
Awesome.
Love it.
Okay, guys. Well, listen, if you want to write to us, we're at shapingspiritpodcast@gmail.com. And remember, as we always say, right? What's our slogan?
We got two things. One, you are not your body. Two, you are not matter, but we all matter.
Awesome.
Love it.
All right, guys. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time. All the best.
Thank you.